That's good. Okay, great. All right. Okay, we've been doing Hilchot Shabbat, and we're now up to cooking, reheating foods, okay? This is at least one class, and I'm especially happy recording it because probably more than half the congregation could use a refresher in these laws, okay? In terms of other places to look for these laws, Shabbat, this is like still, you know, the book that exists. The Hebrew version is better, but if you don't yet read Hebrew fluently, the English exists. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at a Jewish bookstore. This just came out last year. Rabbi Willig, the laws of cooking and warming food on Shabbat. So this is our topic. It's kind of neat. He has a lot of like Hebrew stuff in the back. A lot of his primary sources he brings all of, and the actual English is not terribly. Like you could sit down and read through the English part like in relatively short. It's a little strict about some areas, stricter than I am in a few issues, but reliable, decent mainstream book. And then just the other, which I'm really excited about, Rabbi Melamed's, you know, I've been praising to some of you Rabbi Melamed's books on Halacha. His Hilchot Shabbat book is coming out in a couple months. And when it comes out, I will recommend it, you know, I don't know, like I'll get up on the bima and recommend people buy that book. Also, Asher Shalom has its own little 2-page summary of do's and don'ts of reheating on Shabbat, important standards of Shabbat food preparation for the Asher Shalom period. Since I moved here, I've been meaning to rewrite these guidelines, not because I have any disagreement with them, just because I think I sort of have aspirations of being able to write them in a clearer, more concise, and helpful way. I haven't gotten around to it. So one of these, you know, the quadrant of like, you have your urgent and important task, and you have your urgent, unimportant, and your non-urgent, important, and your non-urgent, non-important. So the thing that gets neglected for me is the urgent, non-urgent, important. So this is the important but not urgent, and it's sort of never, I haven't done it. It's been, you know, 2.5 years, it hasn't been done. But the standards, these are very good. You can rely on these. These are great. These are still our community standards. Community standards for kashrut. We also have community standards for how food is warmed and served on Shabbat, and they're both really important. And in my experience, being out there in the world for some years, in this community and other communities, it's rare that people really goof up in a major way when it comes to kashrut. If they say their home is kosher, it most certainly is, and people take that, like, we know what that means, take it seriously, but people often make serious mistakes when it comes to these laws and in ways that are important. So it's really worth kind of really, you know, learning more about. Is that the door? Is that one of us, or is that one of the actors? Oh, hi! Come in. You didn't miss much, but please come and see. Good to see you. Okay, so let's. I think what we'll do is I'll speak for a little bit, and then maybe we'll go through this document and just sort of make sure we understand it. Okay, and we're talking about cooking food and heating food on Shabbat, or how not to cook food on Shabbat, and yes to heat food. So one of the 39 categories of labor on Shabbat is cooking. It's the last stage in a series of milachot that begins with plowing, right? It's all about preparing food, right? I said you could even think of the laws of Shabbat as defining labor as the things we do to get food, clothing, and shelter, and maybe some other random things as well. But food, clothing, and shelter as the major categories of labor as we define it, and you can even therefore see like Hilchot Shabbat as like an alternate theory of labor. You know, you have Marx, you have Adam Smith and John Locke, all of whom define labor in a certain way, and the Mishnah defines labor as, the Torah defines labor as the things we do to acquire food, clothing, and shelter. A friend of mine wrote a paper making that point some years ago. I think it's interesting. Or it's about creating civilization, but cooking is definitely a malacha. Cooking is using heat to transform food. Very simple. It's a chemical transformation. The amount of heat that's necessary to transform food is so hot that yad soledepa, that your hand will recoil from that temperature. It means if you stick your hand, you know, you've probably, I don't know, like if you stick your hand in a really, really hot pot of water and it goes, right? That's that hot, okay? It has to be that hot for cooking to take place according to Jewish law. The other definition, it's interesting actually, that's the Babylonian Talmud says the temperature is the hand recoils from it, yad soledepo. If you Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud says, ein hayad sholetepa, you can't put your hand in it. it's the same thing, it's just defined, one is defined positively, one negatively, it's the same temperature. This is also defined elsewhere in other passages in the Talmud as hot enough to burn a baby's belly, which is literally what you should, they're very sensitive skin. Okay, look, I have a teacher right now, a colleague teacher who, when he was studying this, he wanted to know what the temperature was. He called, I guess, Child Protective Services and asked them how hot is hot enough to burn a baby's belly. Oh, you should never, put your baby in hot. He said, I know, I just want to know, like, tell me. And they, got very nervous, and he got off the phone very quickly. But it's all the same temperature, okay? If your hand is in it and it recoil, that's hot enough for bishul, for cooking to take place. So what else do we have to know? So this is right. So bringing food to that temperature is a violation of this biblical prohibition. Putting food in a place where it will reach that temperature is also forbidden, right? So what if you put food in the oven and take it out a minute later and it still hasn't gotten hot? Okay, you still can't do that. Okay, although I guess until it heats, you put a pot of water, a pot of soup on the stove and it's burning. Okay, if you leave it on for 6 minutes, it'll start boiling. But until it starts boiling, it hasn't. But if you take it off 30 seconds later, you can still put your hands in. You haven't done it. So you haven't done the malacha yet. If your hand, if you put it on, you take it off before it gets that hot, you haven't completed the biblical malacha. It's still forbidden to do that. Okay, I think it should be. You can't put something in a place where it will cook, even if you remove it from that place before it cooks. People usually wouldn't do this, but it's worth sort of laying it all out. The other important rule about cooking is that I would say ein bishul achar bishul, something can only be cooked once. This is very important. This is a huge leniency. Something can only be cooked once. That means that if something is already cooked and you put it in the oven or put it on and it goes in the oven, goes on a place where will encounter heat, whatever happens to it, it's not cooking. Okay, right? It gets hot again. It can't cook. You can only, right, the prohibition of bishul can only happen once. Or if something is cooked before Shabbat and then it gets warm again, that's not bishul either. That's a very important leniency. And this is what opens the door to all the ways that we reheat food on Shabbat because they're already fully cooked. I understand this is important, right? Makes sense to you, more or less? Yes? Really? Can you explain why it makes sense? No, it doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Because somebody says it makes sense. Why
it's the chemical. You said the cooking is actually chemically changing the food, so if it's already been changed to the point where it's cooked,
beautiful.
Heating it doesn't do that.
Great, exactly. Okay, that's what I was going for, okay? If cooking is a chemical transformation, that can only happen once. So what about, is all cooking a chemical, does everyone agree that cooking is a chemical, yeah, I just sort of said that, you also nodded. What about boiling water? Is that a chemical transformation? I don't think so, or maybe it is. I think it's just a physical transformation, right? You're not actually changing. What? I don't know. Who's a scientist?
You're breaking down the molecules.
You're not breaking down the molecules. You're changing the form of your. I don't know. Okay.
It's still H2O even when it's a gas.
That's what I was thinking. It's still H2O. It's still water molecules. So it's a physical change. That's what I was thinking. You're changing the form of the water from liquid water into, steam, gaseous water. But it's not a chemical transformation. So you could say maybe there's no such thing as bishul for water. Maybe you could boil water and not violate bishul. Okay, that's not what we say. But what we do say though is that since there's no transformation of liquid other than the physical form they're in when they are cooked, this leniency of ein bishul achar bishul only applies for solids. If it's a liquid, you can so if you have chicken and you cook it before Shabbat and you heat it in some way on Shabbat, that's fine. You haven't violated bishul. If it's liquid, like a pot of water in a kettle, and it's cooked before Shabbat, that can't be reheated on Shabbat. Because the reheating is a new act of bishul, a new act of cooking. Make sure you translate that term each time. Bishul that's Hebrew for cooking or boiling. Okay, so for dry things, there's only bishul, cooking only happens once. For liquids, it can happen multiple times. Okay, so that's a different question. Now you have some border cases. What about chili? What about gravy? What about sauce on the bottom of something? What about a chillant? Okay, so we can define those in a minute. Okay, we can define those separately. What about a very hearty soup? Okay, all of these have to be defined. But as the basic principle, I want to kind of lay those out first, and maybe we could do some of these border areas. Okay, so bishul, cooking only happens once. if it's something dry. If something liquid, bishul, boiling, cooking can happen multiple times. So we have a leniency now for, possible leniency opened up, for reheating solid foods if they've already been cooked. Okay.
Of course, the flame has to.
yeah.
turn the flame on.
Fine. So there's the separate rules about how we warm things, and we still have restrictions against lighting a fire. I mean, we haven't talked about it yet in this list of melachot, but you're not allowed to light a fire. You're not allowed to extinguish a fire. We have other restrictions of all the other restrictions of Shabbat apply. Can't slaughter an animal. All the other restrictions on Shabbat apply, but just the restriction of bishul, of cooking, can only that's a one-directional transformation. Once it happens, you can't go back and cook something again unless it's a liquid. Okay. Two other points to make, and then there's a dispute. There was a dispute in the time of the ancient rabbis, the Tanaim, for the very earliest generations of rabbis, particularly the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, about whether or not Shabbat requires that we rest, or whether our tools also have to rest on Shabbat, called Shvitat Kelim in the Talmudic parlance. And Beit Shammai said, yes, there is a problem. Shvitat Kelim is a thing. That is something we have to be concerned about, which means that you can't, all your stuff has to rest also. And Beit Hillel say, no, your stuff can do work on Shabbat as long as you don't do work on Shabbat. And the cases that they set up would be a case of, classic case, you put your olives in an olive press. Before Shabbat begins, everything is set up, you have a heavy stone, the olives are there, and you walk away, and on Shabbat, the stone is pressing, and you get olive at the end, okay? Or you put your cloth in a big vat of dye to get dyed and colored, and then after Shabbat, it's done. You put your grain in a big water powered mill before Shabbat, it grinds it on Shabbat, you flour, come back after Shabbat, you flour. So all of these cases, Beit Shammai say this is a problem of Shvitat Kelim. On Shabbat, your tools, your mill, your press, your dyeing apparatus is operating, is doing things on Shabbat that you can't do yourself. But he'll say, no, as long as you set it up before Shabbat, you're not dyeing, you're not grinding, you're not pressing, you're not doing anything on Shabbat that's forbidden. These machines are doing it for you, that's not a problem. Maybe there's a problem if the water mill makes a lot of noise. We don't want to have lots of noise on Shabbat. It doesn't look good to have our factories operating on Shabbat. Fine, but there's no problem with Shvitat Kelim. Which means that if you put raw food on the stove or in the oven before Shabbat, and it cooks on Shabbat, you haven't violated bishul. Because the act of cooking is to put the food in a place where it will cook. The oven, the stove, then cooks it on Shabbat, that's fine. Because we're not worried about Shvitat Kelim. Your oven is allowed to work on Shabbat. Your oven is not a Jewish man or woman who's obligated to keep Shabbat. Your oven is an oven. So the act of putting it on the oven, that's the act of bishul that we're restricted on, that the restriction falls upon. If that takes place before Shabbat begins, then whatever happens on Shabbat is not going to be a problem with bishul. That's another important sort of principle to kind of set up the system now of what we do on Shabbat. One other definition we have to sort of work at is
That's the halacha. We go by Hillel, not.
In almost every case, Hillel wins over Shammai. It seems Hillel was sort of the different opinions about why Hillel and how Hillel won over Shammai. Simple answer is a voice from heaven said Hillel wins, and also Hillel was the majority opinion, and also Hillel were nicer in their debates, and they always quoted the opinion of Shammai before they quoted their own opinion. You can sort of combine all of these together and say that they were the majority because they were nicer and more intellectually honest, because they cited Shammai's opinion. There was one day, however, when they took account in the Sanhedrin or whoever it was, the yeshiva, and the Beit Shammai, the school of Shammai outnumbered Beit Hillel, and they passed through a whole bunch of legislations that day because they realized they had the majority, and there's like a lame duck Congress. They passed through 18, however many, laws that were enacted by Beit Shammai. So, but usually Beit Hillel wins. Yes.
There's no issue that people will think that you did it in Shabbat.
Um,
For example, turning on TV. Some people say that if you turn on TV before Shabbat, So there's a restriction saying, yeah, maybe Shema.
So there is something called married ayin. There is something like it
Exactly.
looks as though you just right. You can't do anything that looks as though you did something forbidden. I mean that it's unclear the parameters of that restriction. I would say. I don't think that's why you can't watch TV. I think the reason not to watch TV on Shabbat is because the act of watching TV is inconsistent with like the type of environment we want in our home on Shabbat, the type of things we're supposed to be doing on Shabbat. I don't know that if it because if it were known, because like there's really no different than you have a light on in your house and everyone knows that you leave a light on in your living room on Shabbat. Maybe it's on a timer, and everyone knows that Shomrei Shabbat Jews who are Sabbath observant don't turn on enough lights, and they just either use timers or they leave a light on all of Shabbat. And everyone just knows that, so it's not married ayin. And the television really would be no different, other than the fact that the act of watching television is itself inconsistent with the type of things we're supposed to be doing with ourselves on
So
Shabbat.
with the olives, the whole story with the olives, it's okay?
Yeah, totally okay. If you put it in, it's all set up before Shabbat, it's totally fine. And that's exactly what the light, you turn the light on the timer, you put food in you make cholent, all the, it's all done before Shabbat, and then what happens on Shabbat is not a problem. Olives is fine. Again, the water wheel, so maybe things like a dishwasher, putting a dishwasher in a time, maybe the dishwasher or have a washing machine, things that are allowed, a dishwasher or a washing machine, I think people would be more restrictive on because of the noise they make. And it's like, I think should be quiet and tranquil in our homes on Shabbat. So even though you set everything up before Shabbat begins and you just press start and then you light candles, it's not so nice to have like for the next 45 minutes or an hour to have,
No, I thought about specifically for cooking reasons. But
So cooking, we'll see. Okay. So the other thing we have to define is when I said cooking, once something cooks, you can't cook again. How cooked does it have to be in order to, for that to be applied, right? If it like just a little bit cooked, the starts to cook, or does it have to be totally done? What if it is totally done, but some people like it a little bit more done? Like I like my steak medium rare, and you like your steaks well done. So like, what about in between medium rare and well done? So this is a dispute in halakha. One opinion is Machal Ben Dorsai. Ben Dorsai was some sort of highwayman, and he was always on the run. So he didn't have time for cooking things, but he would cook these a little bit. Like maybe I think 1/3 is, and then he would just eat it because he was living out, was a highwayman. Not life of crime. He didn't have time. He's always moving from place to place. And the other opinion is kol tzarka, it has to be fully cooked. And really, we're sort of both of them are kind of brought down as opinions in the Shulchan Aruch. I believe in quotes both of them. And really, ultimately, it really kind of, expresses two different attitudes towards cooking. Some people cook because like you need to eat food, and some people cook because it's an art form. It's like a way to express love and joy and wonderful things. And both of these are true about why people cook things. And so they're sort of both there. So I believe, so we're gonna, I think for most halachic purposes, we're lenient. We're going to say if it's at least like machal ben dorsai, a third cooked, half cooked, whatever, like sort of mostly cooked, basically edible. At that point, that's sufficient. But I think there are cases where we're a little bit stricter, and we want it to be fully cooked as well. I'm gonna double check on that because it rarely is relevant, except for a few other, because there's some other issues that are maybe more important. And these are they. So that's the biblical, those are the parameters of the biblical violation of cooking on Shabbat. The rabbis, however, legislated additional restrictions around food preparation on Shabbat because of some concerns they had. One concern was lest you stoke the fires to make it cook sooner. Let's say I put my food in the pot, in the oven, or on the stovetop before Shabbat, and I light candles, and dinner's starting in 30 minutes, and my stew is still raw. My chicken is not roasting, and I have guests already coming in the door. So what I'm going to do, I might be tempted to take a stick and poke the fires to make the fire burn a little higher, so my food cooks faster. That is a biblical violation of stoking the fires. So that's one concern they had. Second concern they had was certain activities might look as though you're cooking. Like to take something like a cold, thing from the refrigerator, whatever, a cold roast chicken, and put it someplace warm next to the fire so it heats up. That looks very much like cook. Even though it's already cooked, in bishul, you can't cook something twice. it looks an awful lot like cooking, and so that was a series of restrictions they made around doing things as well that looked like they're cooking. Basically, there are two different rabbinic restrictions on Shabbat. One is called shehiyah, and the other is chazar. So let's talk about that. Shehiyah is a rabbinic prohibition against leaving something in a place of heat on Shabbat, unless it is already mostly cooked, or the fire is somehow covered up. Okay? Ovens used to retain heat for a long time. So you could extinguish the fire, push the fire out of the, you imagine like a little box with like a thing on top for your pot, and inside is a fire burning, and it's made of clay or something that retains heat. So you can actually put the fire away, and it still cooks, because the oven itself, the little kior, retains a lot of heat. So if they said, they're concerned you're going to make the fire bigger. So what do they say? So either the food that's in the pot is fully cooked already, or it's mostly cooked already, so you're not going to be tempted to stoke the fire. Or you're going to move the fire out of the way, in which case it will cook because the oven is really hot itself, but there's no fire there anyway. You cover the fire, and so there's nothing to stoke with. There's no coals, no embers to stoke. Third possibility is if you throw a piece of raw meat into your stew right before Shabbat. Not that it means the opposite extreme. Either it's mostly cooked, so you're not going to be tempted. You cover the fire, so there's nothing to tempt you. Or 3, you throw a raw piece in, so that it's obvious to you that no matter what, this is not going to be done in time for dinner. And what are you doing this for? You're doing this for tomorrow's lunch. So this is a rabbinic decree against shehiyah, against leaving something. So even though I just said, according to the biblical definition of cooking, we side like Beit Hillel, ein shvitat kelim, right? You could, so as long as you set everything up right before Shabbat starts, it can cook on Shabbat. The rabbi said, no, you can't. Because we're worried you're going to want it to be done sooner in time for your dinner. So what do they say? When Shabbat starts, it has to be edible. Or you have to cover the fire. Or C, you throw a big chunk of raw meat into it so that no matter what, it won't be done Friday night, and clearly you're just doing this for Saturday lunch and you're not going to be tempted to stoke the fires. So in a modern context, what does that mean? This means that if you leave something, so if something is mostly done, mostly cooked already, we know what that means. It's mostly cooked already, okay? And if something is a raw chunk of something is thrown in, so clearly it's not going to be done, cholent, so a stew, a big chunk of raw meat, no matter what, it's not going to be done in time for dinner Friday night, but it'll be done for Saturday lunch. Okay. How do you cover the fire with a modern oven? What does that mean? Covering the fire with a modern oven means a couple of opinions. You either have a blech, a piece of metal over the flame, and or you cover the knobs of your oven. The really good blechs actually cover the flame and cover the knobs. So, meaning adjusting the knobs of your stove might be the modern equivalent of stoking the fire. So maybe you can't see the flame, it won't tempt you. Others say no, the knobs themselves should be covered, so you remember not to turn it. If you put it in the oven, there's no flame to cover because you can't see the flame, so if it's in the oven, maybe you cover the knobs of your oven, so you're not going to adjust it. In that way, you can, if the chicken or whatever isn't mostly cooked and basically edible when Shabbat begins, it can complete its cooking process on Shabbat because the knobs in your oven are covered. Or the thing that's on the pot on your stove, on the burners, so the burners are covered with a metal plate, and or one that covers the knobs as well. You're not going to adjust the flame, and that's okay. Alternatively, an electric warmer is maybe a more safer from a fire safety perspective. And also, there's no issue of shehiyah. There's no flame. The ones that are better for Shabbat use have no knobs to adjust. There's nothing to adjust. Just put them on. There's nothing to adjust. If they do have a knob, you cover the knob with aluminum foil so it can't be adjusted, and then you're okay. Vis-a-vis shehiyah. So then you can put something on. You can put like a little casserole. You're gonna cook it on some electric hot plate or something like that. And even if it's not edible when Shabbat begins, it'll continue to cook on your electric hot plate, and so that's going to be okay. Vis-a-vis shehiyah. The rabbinic prohibition against leaving something on the heat when Shabbat begins. Yes.
I don't understand all this about throwing the raw meat in, because to me that's still cooking, even if you're not gonna eat it Friday, you're gonna use it.
You're allowed to cook, remember? You're allowed, because you're not cooking, the pot is cooking, the oven is cooking,
That's right, it's a solid,
right?
not a liquid.
Exactly,
Never.
right? Good? And again, it's before Shabbat. No, I mean, the important thing is that it's a solid. The important thing is that it's before Shabbat. And so it is cooking on Shabbat, which is fine. We're just worried that the rabbis are worried that it's fine to cook on Shabbat if you're not cooking, if your stuff is cooking. If you put it in before Shabbat, the stuff itself can cook on Shabbat. The rabbis were concerned about stoking the fire, and if it's a big chunk of raw meat, no one's going to stoke the fire, it ain't going to help. Yes?
You have to put the thing on the stove before.
Correct. Absolutely.
That's the main.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
all of the rules that are talking about the idea of stoking the fire, that's all before Shabbat. So if you're,
Meaning
it
you have
has
to,
to be
yes.
mostly cooked before Shabbat.
Yes.
You have to extinguish or cover before
Yes.
Shabbat, or you add the
Yes,
raw
because if it's
or
on
whatever.
Shabbat, because if it's on Shabbat itself and it's not, and it isn't cooked, then you're cooking. That's the biblical violation.
Yeah.
Now, you also, however, I also said if it's already cooked before Shabbat begins, then it can't cook again. So if it's a dry, solid food that you're allowed to reheat on Shabbat, then we get to the secondary question of chazara, of there's a prohibition again. Once something is totally removed from the heat, like it's in your refrigerator overnight, and you return it to the heat on Shabbat itself, that looks as though you're cooking it, and that's a problem as well. So how do you get away from that? You leave it on the heat over Shabbat. If you serve it, let's say if a kettle, you're gonna pour it. You don't leave it down and walk away. You keep your hand on it, or you're looking at it the whole time as people are serving themselves. Because I'm gonna put it back on the heat afterwards. And then, as long as you don't just walk away from it and forget about it, you can then return it back to the heat on Shabbat. You serve something, rice from a platter. It's hot. You bring it to the table. People serve themselves. You're allowed to put it back on the heat. But if you were to just take it out of the refrigerator, without any, then, or you put it down at the table for the meal. At the end of the meal, you want to put it back on the heat so that it stays warm for some other second seating. That would be a problem, okay? Because you have to have focus on it, or keep your hand on it, or maybe even never actually fully put it down, so that you can return it to the heat. There is a way, however, to heat something that's been in the refrigerator on Shabbat. And if it's dry, and that is to use an electric Shabbat warmer, because a warmer of that sort is not used for cooking. And the lenient opinion about those warmers says that since they're never used for cooking, it doesn't look like cooking if you put something on those warmers. And so we take solid foods from the refrigerator on Shabbat morning, Shabbat lunch, whatever, and put them on an electric warmer. If you get a big warming oven, you can put them in a warming oven. If a warming drawer in your fancy, kitchen, put it in a warming drawer. Those are not used for cooking. They're not really efficient as cooking devices. They're just used for warming. And to put food from the refrigerator that's totally cold onto one of those things on Shabbat does not look like cooking, and therefore it's not a problem. Yes.
But you can place an entirely warm or entirely raw stew on a flame before Shabbos,
Correct.
and then leave it there.
Mhm.
You don't need a blech, you don't need anything, right?
If the stew, well, no, because we're worried about stoking the flame, right? Because it's not cooked. So unless there's a big chunk of raw meat,
Okay.
if it's obvious because there's a big chunk of raw meat in this stew, like clearly it's not
But
going
if the whole thing is raw,
They talk about meat, if I recall correctly. My recollection is that the sources speak about meat because other things cook kind of quicker. And
So even if your intention was never to eat it Friday night, it's for
you really want to have some real not your intention might not be enough. You have to
Okay.
have something in there that's good. But all you have to do if you want to do the stew in this way is make sure the flame is covered. So if it's on your stovetops, you have a blech. Put a metal sheet over to cover the flames, and or you cover. There are different opinions. Maybe the knob should be covered as well. Ideally, or a crock pot. If you have a crock pot, there is no flame, and you just all you have the crock pot. All you have to do is cover the knob. Take masking tape or aluminum foil and cover the knob of your crock pot. You can fill it up before Shabbat, plug it in, you're good to go.
I don't understand what the Shabbat warming looks like. I know what a blech looks like, but,
An electric, you mean so a plain blech is just a piece of metal that goes over your.
right, I know what that is.
Oh, a
but
Shabbat warmer. What I'm talking. Oh,
Yeah, I know.
we have them downstairs in the kitchen. Maybe I'll show you after class. It's you know you can Google on here.
Here,
I should
they
draw a
have
picture.
little feet, and it's like metal with like plastic ends, and
Oh, it's on
usually
top
you
of
just
it?
plug it in. Yeah, it's just like, it looks like a tabletop. And it's, I don't know, we have one that's like this big, and it's like metal, plastic ends, so you don't like grab it when it's hot, I guess. And it's just this little feet, so it sits right above the counter. You set it on the counter and plug it in, and the whole thing just stays warm.
Yeah, here's one. $149 on Amazon. It's an expensive one, okay? Get it cheaper. Here it is. Here, I'll show you a picture.
It's like just one of those regular, oh.
Yeah, it's like
Seen this before?
Mm-mm.
Seen this before? They sell them at, you can get them at Skokie.
You gotta make sure they don't have the knob, right?
Without the knob is better. Yeah, exactly. Because with the knob, then you have to do a covering.
Ours has a knob, but it's just on off.
That's fine. On off is
Yeah,
fine.
it's
Yeah.
just, so it looks like a knob, but like it's just
Yeah.
on.
And you can set them up on a timer, so it doesn't have to be, you know, super hot. You know, the whole day. Okay. And the drawers are things you can buy, you know, at fancy. These sort of fancy homes in Teaneck, they build these, you know, like drawers. You've seen them before? Right.
Actually.
Never used one, and that's, I'm just laughing, 'cause like my cousin, hers now is used for like, like chips and like,
Oh,
she
okay.
doesn't even use it for anything.
So it's, if you observe Shabbos, it's very helpful. It's a drawer that's like, it's not like an oven, it's like a drawer,
Mhm.
and it doesn't cook things, it just warms things. So you put your things in the warming drawer, and they're very fancy. So this is like a thing now in, you know, some,
It's just, it's always warm?
you turn it on
You
whenever,
turn it on,
before
yeah.
Shabbat, and then it's for warming food. It's good. I mean, they weren't invented for Jews. They're invented for people who you're serving a big meal, and you have different courses, and you're constantly rotating things off your oven, and
So
using it.
catering got it, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, for caterers certainly have them. I mean, you can get,
Yeah.
you can get industrial sized ones, like these warming cabinets.
Oh
so
yeah,
like,
the
they're like,
cabinets that have all the trays.
like on wheels, and you open up the big drawer, and it's like you put your big trays of your food in these different shelves. And so commercially, for sure, and you can get smaller ones for homes. But for Jews, they're great because they're not used for cooking, not for cooking, and you can use them on Shabbat. I actually once saw a home that had this is like a pre-2008, you know, kind of thing, like when this was still, the company went bankrupt in the financial collapse. You'll understand why. It was a refrigerator / oven that was timer operated. So you could basically your food would be refrigerated and then it would cook it. So you could put like a chicken in this thing and it would be cold until you were ready to cook it, and it would like turn on and heat and cook it. So it was like a refrigerator / oven all in the same thing that you could control by timer, which is pretty cool. It was like a company, I think, that used to build spaceships or something. Like really like invested a lot in insulation, and so they were able to build this thing. So obviously the market was very small, and it didn't do so well, but it was a pretty awesome thing to see. Okay. Anything other quick? We can talk about tea in a minute, but maybe we'll go through these restrictions. Let's go. Maybe I'm gonna get a few copies of this, and then we'll read through it, and we'll make sure we understand it. Okay. Okay.
That's what's nice about the warmer, is that it's like a griddle and there's no flame, so it's, like you could even touch it. I mean, you wouldn't wanna like hold your hand on it, but like, that's what's nice, and so you can leave something on
Is it
there.
timer?
Sorry.
No, ours just plugs in, it's just not hot enough to do anything. So like from a fire safety standpoint, it's good.
So mentioning fire safety, I'm
Yes.
going up, I know we would leave things on during the day for safety reasons.
That's.
It's very uncomfortable for me, even like when we have our crock pot, to leave it in, go to shul, come home. It makes me So I guess like what fire safety information?
Fire safety. You're talking about fire safety. No, look, it's important. It's really, it's important, and there, and there was a terrible tragedy a year and a half ago in Brooklyn with a fire that was set by some equipment of this sort. So, what do I want to say? I think there's a certain amount of risk in having an appliance plugged in and operating for 25 hours. And I think most of like the highest code appliance things have shutoffs that don't allow that to happen. So that therefore there's inherent risk. I think it's okay to have some degree of risk. I think people like do risky things for their, if it's whether it's riding a bicycle is risky, flying an driving someplace, everything that we do entails some risk, and for priorities we take risks. I think that means we should minimize risks, but I think it is true that 25 hours, there's unavoidable risk in having something that is operating 25 hours. So I think for sure you have a smoke detector in your home. You don't leave exposed flames. I think if you light Shabbat candles, maybe don't do that if no one's going to be at home. If you do, put them in, no one's going to be home for dinner. Let the candles in your sink or something, where there's no possibility that a stray wind or something will knock them over. Crockpot to me seems very safe. Like it seems to me like if the wiring in your home, the crockpots are really designed for long-term use. I think a crockpot actually, like they sell them for. I think that crockpot can actually be certified by Underwriters Laboratory. It has a UL on it. That means that it's past safety inspections and it's high quality electronics, and it should be fine to be on for 25 hours without any risk. And like they're designed for that. The food won't catch fire and the electronics shouldn't catch fire, and they have built-in they have circuit breakers built in. They actually once had a crockpot, but if the water overflowed in some way that it shouldn't have, and it just shut itself off. And that's you should if you're good at wiring in your apartment that are up to code, that should be fine. The plata, I think, is, if you have your oven on over Shabbat or Yom Tov, because you'll be cooking on Shabbat or Yom Tov in your oven, you should just make sure you have a carbon monoxide. You should have these things anyway, but like that, that's the way. You want, because you have a flame, that's a flame burning in your home, you want to make sure you have carbon dioxide testers. I think with a plata, the ones that are made for Shabbat use, they're designed to be on for a long time, and I think that creates you want to make sure that if it's a grounded outlet, it goes into a grounded outlet. I think if you put on a timer, I think that makes it safer because there's less of a chance that something will fall in it and catch fire. There's less chance you'll forget it's on and touch it and burn yourself. So you can plug it into a timer. The timer should be a heavy-duty appliance timer, so the 3 prongs of your electric warmer go into 3 prongs, and your timer go into 3 prongs, grounded outlets in your kitchen. To me, look, I'm not a fireman, but I think that is that limits risk. Ashley, Ashley.
Just like it doesn't get that hot. Like I could stick my hand
Oh,
in
yeah?
it and it wouldn't burn. Like it's
Ours does. Some of them.
Some of them do. Ours doesn't. It's like kind of like a radiator. You wouldn't want to grab the radiator, but it's not going to burn you. It's not going to set anything on fire, and you leave the radiator on all the time. It's kind of like that. And because it's like all encased in metal, and there's nothing going in or out of it, makes me anxious too. But that it doesn't.
I think the risk is also there's the dangerous thing falling on and catching fire. There's also the danger of meaning if the electronic device is not meant to be on for that long, there could be an electrical fire. I think perhaps that's I don't know how these things what the fear is, but again, the more it's designed for it, the less of a concern. If it's on a timer, if it's not on as much. If your wiring in your apartment is up to code, that should also help. Fire detector, smoke detector. Ashley? Yeah.
I think you answered my question. I've got this fancy crock pot that I found that is really nice because I can turn it on, I can put it on a timer. So something like that is okay.
Yeah, the timer's built in. Yeah, you set your timer before
It
Shabbat.
shuts off.
Exactly. That's even safer. That's even safer.
Okay.
That's even safer. I mean, if it'll stay on for as long as it needs to,
Yeah.
and shut itself off, then that's even safer. Yeah.
Okay.
regarding the safety that you mentioned, I know that they're working on a plata that actually works with induction,
I saw that.
so that's pretty cool. There's no problem with that.
Right, I saw that, but it doesn't exist yet, right? It's like a.
It's a prototype, I guess.
I think there were people who were like, it's like a crowd-funded
I know what
Oh,
that
like a
is.
Kickstarter?
Kickstarter,
Yeah.
yes, a Kickstarter campaign for one of these induction platas, which is supposed to be, yeah.
But you can use it if you have a stovetop that is induction. You can use it because there is an automatic one that you can keep. I think with a timer. I think it's-
See, if it's used for heating,
Oh no.
for cooking, then it wouldn't. But if it's designed as a warming tray, that's the difference. Yeah, induction oven, I don't think even. Okay, so let's go through this list again. As far as one day I'll write a new one. I started it a few times. Okay, but this is still good. Okay, prohibitions regarding cooking or heating food on Shabbat are based on the Torah prohibitions of not cooking, not using fire on Shabbat, and the rabbinic extension of these laws. Okay, we covered this already, right? Observing them is a personal decision for each individual and family to contemplate on their own. Okay, I mean they're obligatory. It is a mitzvah, but that is also true. Like we are a welcoming community, and everyone makes his or her own choices. As a community, we do not judge anyone for how or whether they implement these laws in their homes. That is true. People have a right to grow religiously and move towards observance at a pace appropriate for them. That is absolutely true. However, it is important for people to know what the community's halachic standards are. That is also true. Okay. When you invite people to your home, which I would hope becomes a regular activity, you take upon yourself responsibility to feed those guests food that they are halachically allowed to eat. That means keeping to community standards. In addition to making sure the food you serve is itself kosher, according to community standards of kashrut, there are Shabbat community standards which you need to observe regarding that food. Again, for hospitality purposes or for, wanting to keep these laws in a careful way purposes. Food that is cooked on Shabbat or even heated incorrectly on Shabbat may even be prohibited to be eaten. Confident these community standards for Shabbat reheating will help unify our community because they allow everyone to feel comfortable hosting and being hosted on Shabbat in any home in Lakeview. Okay, let's just take a moment. I do like the ethos of these guidelines. Many communities, there's a lot of judging and suspicions about whose home you choose to eat at, and who invites whom, and who accepts invitations, and based on guessing how observant people are based on external clues or insider information you may or may not have. I think it's much better to just be very upfront and transparent. These are the standards. This is what keeping kosher means in the shul community. This is how we heat and cook food. Not cook food on Shabbat. And anybody can read these guidelines, and anybody then can follow them. And in that way, we can be much freer about extending hospitality. I'll say there is a leniency that exists if you're a guest in someone's home and you see they do something wrong. If this is endorsed by the Mishnah Berurah, a very important 20th century halachic scholar, based on the position of Vilna Gaon, the 17th century, who says that if it's an accident on their part, they didn't realize it was forbidden to heat food or cook food in this way, and your meal is going to be ruined if you can't eat it because you're invited to their house and this is what's for lunch, then you can eat it. Because if it was heated in this way accidentally. Accidentally meaning they didn't realize it was forbidden. But much better for everyone to know these rules. Okay, do not put any uncooked food or beverage on a hot burner in a heated oven, in a crock pot that is on, or in a heated urn on Shabbat itself. Okay, that is the biblical violation of cooking. Got it? Do not heat any liquids on Shabbat. Water, or even fully cooked soup or stew, anything that can be poured out, needs to be put on the heat in an urn, crock pot, or on the stove and left there before Shabbat. Okay, because liquid doesn't have this leniency of you can't violate cooking twice. So far so good?
When you say do not heat, you mean not boil anything?
Heat, any heating, meaning, yes, you can, yeah. You could warm it in your hands. If you take some salad dressing out of the refrigerator and it is congealed, you can run it under cold water in the sink, if that will, or you can hold it in your hands so that the salad dressing, melts. Do not reheat even cooked solid foods that is cooled down from the refrigerator, for example, either by putting it on the stove or in the oven. However, you can reheat cold, solid, pre-cooked food by adhering to any one of the following procedures. Okay? Everyone good? It's actually better with one, put it on a warming tray, a plata in Hebrew, I don't think that's Hebrew, but whatever, which cannot be adjusted. Take the knob if there is one, and is not designed to cook, but rather just to warm, right? So it's not designed to cook, it's just designed to warm. You're not violating the rabbinic decree of putting something on the heat for the first time on Shabbat in a way that looks as though you're cooking. 2, put it on a kedera blech, or a non-blech, which is a pan of water covered by another pan, not just a plain sheet of metal, which is called a blech, right? We didn't talk about this, but that also works. And yes?
Sorry, why again can't you reheat a already cooked solid food?
You're not violating bishul, the biblical prohibition of bishul. You are violating the rabbinic prohibition.
It looks like.
It looks like cooking.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why you can't put it on the blech. But a kedera, if there's a, you can put it on top of another vessel that's on the stove. So if you can actually heat something. You could take a, what was it, like a pumpkin bread loaf out of the refrigerator and put it on top of your crock pot and heat it in that way. Or you can put it, if you have they make these, actually my cousins have, it's like a giant hot water urn that goes on the stove top with a flame underneath it, and it's made of metal with a flat top, and you can heat things on top of it. They also make these low things, a tiny little tray of water that goes on top of the stove, a very thin layer of water goes on top of the stove, and you heat things on top of that. This is less common. The plata is the safest, simplest way to go.
So in the case of the pumpkin bread though,
Yeah.
for example, like you couldn't have cooked that on the blech to begin with. I mean, it's bread.
Correct.
So why does it have to then have something separating it from?
Meaning it's obviously, it doesn't look like cooking.
You know, because it doesn't look like cooking, because you can't bake bread on
That's a good question.
that, right?
Yeah, so I guess it's more. That's a very good point. It also right. I think we're much more. We're much less specific and particular. We're much more general. Like it's a general decree against putting food on the heat for the first time on Shabbat, even if it's already cooked, because it looks as though you're cooking. And actually, some of the sources say this too. This restriction, this rabbinic decree is also about stoking the fires. Just you want things to stay on the heat, so you put it on the plata or you put it on top of the crock pot. 3, putting it in a warming drawer or cupboard, which is designed just to warm, not to cook. Okay. So what is the blech? A metal sheet over the stove that I grew up with allowed me to do, right? Isn't the blech allow you to, right? Good question. A simple blech, or sheet of metal, only allows you to return hot food, solid or liquid, removed from the stove, assuming the food remains hot and you intended to return it to the blech in the first place. So you have your kettle on the blech Friday night. You take it off the blech, you pour it in with tea, you put a black on the blech. It stays hot and you can have your hot water for tomorrow. Preferably the food should not even be put down before it is returned to the blech. A blech does not allow you to reheat food once it has cooled down. Without a blech, once you remove food from a stove, even a glass-covered stove, and it cools down, you cannot return it to the stove. A kedera blech, meaning a pan of water covered by another blech, the equivalent of a double boiler, allows you to return cold, solid, pre-cooked food to the stove. Okay. Special exemption. Okay. Special exemption. If you are in a difficult situation, because you haven't planned this out in advance, I don't know, you may rely on the leniency which great Lithuanian rabbis have permitted. Among them, these great Lithuanian rabbis, most significantly Rabbi Soloveitchik of Boston, and probably his brother as well, who was Aaron Soloveitchik in Chicago. But certainly the Soloveitchik in Boston taught this. And in Boston they did this.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Just real quick. How long can you, if you have a kettle on the blech,
Mm-hmm.
you put it on there before Shabbos,
Right.
it boiled the water, and then you take it off and you pour people tea, but
Yeah.
there's still water left in there. How long can
Put it back.
how long does it take before I can't put it back?
As long as it's still yad soledet, you can put it back. As long as it hasn't cooled down so much that you can't, that you still can't put your finger in it, then you can put it back on the blech. Okay, for a difficult situation, allow leniency with the great Lithuanian rabbis have permitted. As long as food was in the oven or on a blech when Shabbat came in, from before candlelighting to an hour after candlelighting, that whole period of liminal time between sunset and dark, the food, solids only, can be returned to the oven or the blech even if it has cooled down. Therefore, if you didn't set up the Kedera blech or the warming tray before Shabbat, you can still use the extra solid food you had from Friday night for Shabbat lunch if you need to. Okay? So you have your chicken is in the oven for that entire period from candlelighting till after dark. You take it out of the oven, you serve it for dinner. You put the rest of it in the refrigerator. Shabbat morning, you can put it back in the oven. Assuming you left the oven on, didn't touch the oven, you put it back in the oven on Shabbat day. Okay? This is, so the Vaychik taught this, and in Boston they did this, and let's say in extraneous circumstances it certainly can be relied upon. But yeah, only food that was, this only works if you serve the same food Friday night and Saturday lunch, and the food was actually on the heat on the platta, or you have to like set it up really in advance on Friday. It's on the heat, it's on the platta or in the oven for the entire period of being a shmashot between sunset and dark. Okay? Get an electric warmer, it's much easier than any of this, okay? Remember, only solid foods which have already been cooked can be reheated, okay? Again, only solid food. You may keep food in a crock pot or on the stove or in the oven overnight, but make sure that any food you serve is at least 1/2 cooked before Shabbat starts. Remember, that's the law of shehiyah. That's the law of you can't leave something in the oven and on the stove when Shabbat begins unless you cover the fire or it's 1/2 cooked. For example, if you're making cholent, make sure you put it in with enough hours to make it minimally edible. Hard and chewy, perhaps, but edible before Shabbat. If cholent takes 5 hours to be ready to be served, even if normally it would served after 12 hours, the rabbis estimated 1/2 of that would allow it to be minimally edible, meaning that you have to give it 2.5 hours to cook before Shabbat starts. Now, the crock pot, if you just cover the knobs, that's all fine. Meaning, this is if you don't cover the knobs. This is if you don't have a blech. This is if it's just directly on the fire. If it's on a blech, you don't have to worry about the half cooked before Shabbat begins. Whereas in the crock pot with the knobs covered, you don't have to worry about the 1/2 cooked before Shabbat begins. Another exemption, if you throw in some raw meat or chicken into the cholent right before Shabbat starts, then you don't have to follow the half-cooked rule, since there's no chance that the cholent will be ready until the next morning. Right? This is all what I said. If you want to have your hand at rewriting this, you're welcome to. I think this is actually not, it sort of says everything has to be said. Okay. Another important, do not stir food in the crock pot or in a heated stove when Shabbat comes in, at the very least until it is fully cooked. If possible, remove the inner pot from the outer metal element for scooping out the contents. Because why? If you stir it, you're facilitating cooking. So if your soup is still in the platta and you're serving with a ladle directly from the soup on the stove, right? You followed all the rules. You put the soup on the fire before Shabbat starts, and either it's on a blech or you make sure it's half cooked before Shabbat begins. Then at dinner, you still can't scoop out on when the soup is still in a hot place, because that stirring facilitates the further cooking. So it's all the way done. What further cooking is happening? Maybe nothing, but maybe it gets even yummier the more you stir it, the more it cooks. You know, if it's the chicken bones get soft and chewy, which people like. I'm not making up that example. That's discussed in halakhic sources. So you remove the pot from the fire, you serve it, ladle it out, then you can put it back onto the blech, right? Because it still is piping hot, so you can serve seconds later, and it still stays warm. You take the crock pot, the inner ceramic pot, out of the heating element, bring it to the table, and then you serve it. And you can put it back on as long as you had that full intention to put it right back, it doesn't cool off. If you want, you can even put it back into the heating element so that 45 minutes later, when people want their seconds, it still stays warm. I don't think it's actually necessary with cholent. I think a big cholent will stay warm for hours, and you can, it's fine. You may only add piping hot water to the crock pot or a pot on the stove, and only by transferring it directly from a hot water urn or another pot on the stove via ladle or spoon into the crock pot. So if you're worried if the crock pot, your cholent is getting dry, you can want to add water to it. You can't have cold water because that cold water is going to get heated and that's cooking. So you can take piping hot water from an urn and put that directly into the crock pot. It's piping hot. It's not getting recooked, and that is permissible to do so that your cholent doesn't burn. I've never done that, but it's just okay. I think we should pause now. We'll talk next time about tea and other things. Okay. Any last minute questions before we pause? We're finishing up. Yes. Everyone's welcome to stay for 9 o'clock tomorrow. Any questions? Okay, so take it, next time we meet will be, I'll try meeting Tuesday the 3rd, is that gonna work? Okay? 8 o'clock is still okay?